In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the stock turbo on your B58 BMW. This DIY will work whether you're replacing it with an actual stock replacement turbo or if you're upgrading to a stock style hybrid turbo. So something like a pure turbo or a Turbosystems turbo, any one that fits and looks like the OEM one, this will work for you. Now, before you're ready to install, you want to make sure you have all the parts on hand that you're going to need to replace. Primarily the gaskets, to prevent leaks or anything after you install the turbo. You should replace everything. So I've got an exhaust manifold gasket that goes between the turbo and the cylinder head. And then I've also got a replacement throttle body gasket that goes between the throttle body and the charge pipe, since you're going to have to remove that. The only thing I'm missing here is the downpipe gasket, and I do recommend replacing that as well, since you'll be removing the downpipe. And then also the actual manual recommends replacing all of the nuts. And some people have also had to replace the studs if you snap one off or have an issue with it. Those are a little less likely to be needed. In my case, my car is low mileage and everything comes off and goes back on really easily. But if you know things look easy on YouTube, but they never go that easy when you're actually working on your car, it doesn't hurt to buy some replacement studs and nuts. And if you don't need them, you can just return them and get your money back. And then lastly, just making sure you have everything on hand from a maintenance standpoint. So get some oil, because if your car hasn't been sitting for a while, there's going to be some oil that's draining. You can probably just do an oil change at the same time to save you the headache. You're also going to be losing some coolant, so buy some concentrate, make a 50-50 mix with distilled water, and then have that on hand so you can top it off. And then I'm also going to be replacing my spark plugs because I was messing with the gap a lot the last 2 years, and so instead of changing the gap again, I'm just going to replace them. So now we're ready to actually start removing the turbo. The first thing you're going to do is go to the back of the car, remove the negative terminal on your battery, and then come back up to the front and remove the intake and the downpipe. To prevent this video from being longer than it needs to be, I'm going to just refer you to 2 DIYs I've done in the past if you need instructions on how to remove those 2. So check out my VRSF downpipe install and my Dynon intake install, and then come back to this video. Now that we've removed the intake and the downpipe, we're ready to start taking off the turbo inlet. The first thing you want to do is start taking off this heat blanket that's on the wastegate. It just has these 3 buttons that need to be popped off. Then we're ready to take off these 2 connectors, and it works just like the other ones. You take this tab, pop it out, and then you're going to push it in and pull the connector out. And you're going to do that for the wastegate, and you're also going to do it for this connector down here that's connected to the PCV hose. And then you can actually unclip this entire harness away from the PCV hose. Next, we're going to remove the 2 attachments on the inlet pipe. So first is this crankcase hose, and what I'm going to do is just squeeze on the top and the bottom on these little rib sections. Squeeze that in, and then it'll pull off. You can leave it connected to the actual inlet and it'll come off with the inlet when we take it off. And then the other one is down here. This evap hose also has this rib section on the top and on the bottom. Same thing, squeeze it in and then you'll be able to pull it off. And then finally, you're ready to go for this clip. So take a pick or a flathead screwdriver, whatever you have. Kind of hook it under here, pull it up, and then once you get it all the way unclipped, you'll be ready to actually take off the turbo inlet. Next, we're going to remove the charge pipe, and the first thing we're going to do is remove these 2 connectors for the temperature and pressure sensor. Again, same as the others. Pop this tab up, and then press it in and unplug it. Next, we're going to remove these 3 T30 screws to remove the charge pipe from the throttle body. The last thing that you need to do is remove this C-clip that's down here on the charge pipe connecting it to the turbo. Now this little black retaining feature holds one side in place so that it's easier to remove. So you should be able to pull it straight up more or less and get the clip off. Also, there is this clip that's holding it on to the coolant pipe right here. So you just kind of have to slide it off, and then you'll be ready to actually pull the charge pipe off. Next, we're going to remove this heat shield that's on top of the turbo. So there are 4 half-inch screws, one here, 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 and then all the way in the back right here where you see this bump in the heat shield, there's another one in that hole. So remove those 4 and then pull the heat shield off. Now we have the heat shield off and we need to prepare to let the fluids drain out. So we're going to get under the car. And it's time to remove this under tray, so go all the way around and remove all of these little 8mm and 10mm screws, and then take this under tray off. Now at this point, we've got everything off and we're ready to remove the turbo. You do have a couple options though, because when you remove the lines, some fluid will come out, like you'll lose some coolant and some oil. If you want to make it as clean as possible, you can go to the front of the car on that side of the radiator and disconnect the hose. That will actually drain all the coolant out of the system. And for the oil, obviously you can go down to the oil pan and drain all the oil out of the system as well, and that'll limit how much actually comes out of the turbo. My car's been sitting for a while, so I know most of the oil has already drained to the bottom, so I'm not going to worry about draining the oil. And for the coolant, I'm actually just going to drain it from the water line on the turbo. It'll be a little bit messy, but I'll actually lose less coolant that way versus draining the entire system by pulling that hose at the bottom of the radiator. So to save me some time, I'm just going to let the fluids drain out of the lines as I remove them from the turbo and the engine block. So now we're under the car behind the turbo where the downpipe would be. And the first thing we're going to do is disconnect this water line right here. And so you're basically going to reach up here and pull this heat protection back. So once you've slid it back this far, you'll see this connection, and what we're going to do is slide this off, and then the coolant will drain out of this line. Also, to help the coolant flow a little bit faster, don't forget to remove the cap for your coolant reservoir. Next, once all the coolant is drained out, you're going to unscrew this T30 screw to completely disconnect the coolant line from the block. Next, we're going to remove the other water line from the engine, and that is this connection right here. So you're going to remove that T30 screw and then pull that line out of the block. Again, make sure you have a bucket underneath to catch any coolant that may drain out. All right, now we have the coolant line disconnected, and next is just underneath, you're going to disconnect that oil line. Again, same thing, remove the T30 and then pull the line out. So not a lot of oil drained out. Like I said, my car has been sitting for several weeks, so I knew there wasn't going to be much oil left in the actual engine. So that's good. And then the last thing you need to do is remove this line all the way under the turbo. This is your oil drain line. And you're going to disconnect this T30 down here at the bottom, and that'll let the rest of the oil drain out. And here you see the oil line disconnected from the block. Now you can completely remove the lines if you want. Up here you can remove the oil drain line from the turbo. And then if you remove this screw, you can remove the coolant lines from the turbo. And this top line up here is the oil, and there's another T30 back behind it. So those are kind of hard to get to, and you don't completely need to remove the lines to remove the turbo, but if you want to, you can do that. Just to save some time, I'm going to remove the turbo with the lines attached. Now we're going to remove this turbo support bracket, and it has 3 T30 screws. There are 2 down here, and then the third screw is back here by where you remove the downpipe. So remove those 3 screws and then take the bracket off. And now we're ready to remove the actual turbo. For our case on the B58, it's a little bit different than a typical turbo setup. So there's this bracket down at the bottom that actually stays in place. The turbo wedges into there and then leans up against the cylinder head, and then you attach it with these top nuts. So the only thing we're going to remove are these nuts on the top. There's 7 in total. And make sure you're holding onto the turbo before you remove the last one, because it's going to begin to lean backwards, and that's when you're going to be able to remove it. Also make sure all of the lines that are still connected aren't snagging on anything as you're fishing it out of the engine. Now once you've got the nuts off, on top of the turbo, there's this little retainer bracket that goes across all of them. So pull that off. And actually the turbo's staying on pretty good. And once the bracket is off, you're ready to remove the turbo. Like I said, it'll lean down and then pull out. So hold it from the middle and be ready for it to be a little bit heavy. And you should be able to get it off. And here's what it looks like with the turbo removed. I didn't actually completely remove that bracket. All I did was remove the bolt that was holding the turbo in place. So that'll make it a little bit easier. And then you can kind of see how it mounts to the cylinder head. So like I said, it fits into this slot, just wedges in there, and then it flips up and gets held on by the nuts on top of these studs. So you just fold it out, pick it up and pull it out. I actually kind of pushed it towards the front of the car and then lifted the back up first. That was the easiest to get out, and then you can pull the wastegate and the actual turbo part out behind it. And here we have the turbo ready to start swapping parts over. Make sure you go ahead and tip it over into your coolant bucket again. Just let all the extra fluid that's still in there drain out, and then you can begin swapping over the lines. So you'll go around and start removing all of these T30s, pulling all the lines out. Make sure you replace the O-rings too. There's one on every connection, except for this last coolant line that we removed, just pulled the hose off. But all the other 7 connections will have an O-ring. Replace those, and then you can begin swapping those onto your new turbo. And then flip the turbo over so that you can remove the wastegate. On this side, you need to remove this C-clip. So you're going to take a flathead screwdriver and kind of wedge it into one of these slots and then twist, and that'll make it pop off. Keep a finger on this side just to make sure it doesn't actually go flying. And then on the other end, you're going to remove these 3 T20 screws. So you wedge that in there and then it'll come off. If you have one of these bigger kind of Torx adapters that go onto a socket extension, it's probably too wide on the sides because it's really shallow here. To get it on there, it's kind of difficult. So get one of the smaller ones and that'll fit in there and you can unscrew it easily. Make sure you absolutely do not adjust the length of this arm right here, because that'll throw your wastegate calibration off. And then finally, for those of you that are replacing the turbo with one of the ones that only replaces half of the turbo, what you're going to do is come in here and remove this T30, and that's going to disconnect this V-band, and you can actually take the turbo apart. Your new turbo will fit in just like stock. I do recommend flipping this V-band around. At least on mine, the screw is facing the block. So flip it around so that you can make adjustments on the outside, and you'll need to rotate it and kind of line it up so that this oil drain more or less matches up with the mounting point for the turbo bracket. So get that close, leave it a little bit loose, and when you get it in the car, you can actually adjust the V-band and turn the turbo until it's clocked properly, and then tighten it all the way down once it's in the right position. And at that point, you're basically ready to reinstall the turbo. So you've got all your lines reconnected, your wastegate swapped over, everything is clamped down. Then go ahead, come back to the car. You're gonna put your new gasket on here and make sure you get this pin that's at the very back. Kind of annoying. You'll feel it when you remove the stock gasket, and so when you reinstall it, it might be a little bit hard to get it onto that pin, but get it on there, set everything flat, and then you're able to put the turbo down into the bottom bracket, flip it up, and start your tightening sequence. Now, the way that it actually works is you're going to tighten this middle stud between cylinders 3 and 4 first, and then start oscillating back and forth and working your way outwards. And I'll post all of the actual torque specs at the end of the video. Now, before we go too far, we want to make sure that we prime our turbo. The way you do that is by disabling the fuel system and trying to start the car. And so it'll crank and crank and crank, but it won't actually turn over and turn on the engine. And that will force the mechanical oil pump to turn and begin driving oil throughout the engine block and up around the turbo. The reason why you want to do this is because having some oil on the turbo before you start the car, make sure it's lubricated on that initial hit. If you don't prime the turbo, then there's a chance that you'll basically crank up the turbo to a really high RPM, and that initial hit, there will be no oil, so it'll be completely dry, and that can cause early turbo failure. So disable your fuel system, unplug your injectors, unplug your high pressure fuel pump. You can pull out the fuse that goes to your fuel system, anything that'll disable fuel from getting into the engine. And then when you try to start the car, do it like 2 or 3 times to fully prime it. And then at any point after that, you can start the car. Also, I want to mention the reason why you disable your fuel system and you don't unplug your coil packs, for example, is because by cranking the car over and over with the fuel system on, you can potentially flood it. You're basically still shoving a bunch of fuel into the engine. So disabling the fuel system is a safer way of priming the turbo with this method versus disabling your ignition system. So once you've reinstalled everything, buttoned up all your under trays, and lowered the car back to the ground, you're going to get back into the car to do the final steps. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to do the wastegate calibration, and this is something that you probably won't need to do if you were careful when you swapped your wastegate over and made sure that you didn't adjust the length of the wastegate arm. But it's something that is nice to do just for peace of mind, and it's pretty easy to do with the BMW software. So I'm going to show you how to do that. You can find ISTA+ online. If you look on the BMW coding forums, there are a couple download links that you can use. So find the one that works for you, get it on your computer, and then connect to your car with your Ethernet cable. And then going into the software, we're going to go to Vehicle Management, then Service Functions, then Powertrain, Engine Electronics, Adjustment Functions, and then you're going to scroll down until you find the wastegate valve controller option. And that'll give you the option to teach the end stops and adjust the wastegate linkage. And when you click on that, you hit display and it'll walk you through the steps to actually calibrate the wastegate. And when you run it, you'll actually hear the wastegate going in and out as it's checking the stops. You can also do it just by kind of the troubleshooting way. Turn on the car, see if there's a check engine light. If not, drive it, see if a check engine light comes up related to the wastegate position. And if you do get that, then you can just begin adjusting the arm in and out until the check engine light goes away. So the nice thing with the software is it'll tell you exactly what you need to do if you need to adjust it. But, the other way, if you just want to do it without the software, you can adjust it slowly until you get to a point where you don't get a check engine light. Next, we're going to bleed our cooling system. So you're going to go ahead and top off your coolant reservoir with your 50-50 mix. And then we're going to get back in the car and do the BMW sequence to turn on the electronic water pump first. The way to do that is you hit start, stop, start 3 times. And then we're going to come up to our fan, put it on the lowest setting with the highest fan speed. And then you're going to hold your throttle down all the way to the floor for 15 seconds. And once you've done that for 15 seconds, you'll hear your electronic water pump begin running. Now, our cars have 2 water pumps. We have an electronic water pump and a mechanical water pump. So to bleed the mechanical water pump system, you're going to actually need to turn the car on. So once you've turned it on with the electronic water pump running, you'll see that your revs will kind of rise up and it'll stay almost at your cold start rev level. It'll be like above 1,000 RPM. And that means that it's ready to go through the mechanical pump bleeding sequence. To do that, you're going to hold the pedal down and hold your throttle at about 3,500 RPM for 10 seconds, and then release the throttle and let it go back down to idle. And then you're going to hold it again at 3,500 RPM and then release the throttle again. You do that 10 times for the mechanical pump to flush coolant through the system and to push the bubbles out. And after that, you're just going to let it run. The idle will stay elevated until it's completely bled. It'll take about 10 minutes. While you're doing this, you can continue to top off your coolant tank just to make sure it stays above the minimum line. And after you've done that completely, you'll have the full coolant system bled. After that, you're done. Go ahead and take a test drive. Make sure that you don't have any leaks or anything from your oil lines or your coolant lines. The car might smoke a little bit when you first start it up from the gaskets and oils and everything burning off, but that should go away. So take it for a drive, let the car get up to temp, make sure everything's good. And at that point, you've replaced your turbo. So I hope this video helped you out. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Thanks.